And that will be followed by Julia Glenday, who's going to be introducing or presenting on modeling the impact of channel incision and floodplain restoration using Mike Shee in the Babians Kloof and Krom case studies. Again, we'll have another question and answer session after that. And then Alana will follow after that, Alana Rebello, and have a look at the hydrological benefits in investing in ecological infrastructure, invasive alien tree clearing, and the Bergen Breeder catchments in South Africa. Again, we'll have a Q&A session, and in that Q&A session, if you've got some extra questions that have come over from the other presentations, you're welcome to ask them there as well. And then we'll have closure of the forum. In terms of house rules, please put your microphones on mute while the presenters are presenting. Please do not interrupt the presenters. There is a question and answer session at the end of each of the presentations, so you'll be able to answer questions then. If you have a question during the presentation, please type it in the comments. We will address those first. So we'll have a look at those comments first and then ask those questions. And please put your hand up if you do have a question that you'd like to ask personally. And if possible, well, please introduce yourself, and if possible, put your camera on before presenting. And that is conclusion from my side of things. I'm going to hand over to Philip, and I'm just going to stop sharing screen. Thank you, everybody, and enjoy the sessions.
Thanks very much, Jason, and thanks also for all the registered people. We were quite happy to see such an interest. My name is Philip Höttner from DHI. At the moment, I'm the business owner for Mike Shee, so I'm more the link between the practical applications within our company to the development department. I'm working with Mike Shee now since 10 years. I like it a lot. It's a very interesting approach, and I would like to share with you now a little bit the functionality. So Mike Shee is our in-house solution for the fully integrated hydrological modeling. What means fully integrated hydrological modeling? I will try to explain it in the next couple of slides. So we use Mike Shee to analyze groundwater and surface water and the recharge and evapotranspiration processes together in one model. We do that with Mike Shee. In our opinion, it's the most advanced and flexible framework for integrated hydrological modeling. To start in the very beginning, what you see here is the typical natural water cycle, right? So you have a lot of processes and they are all closely linked to each other. That means you have precipitation that can infiltrate into the soil. It can run directly on the surface. It can run over the groundwater, can discharge into rivers, end up in the sea, and again evaporate again to the atmosphere. So all these processes are closely linked to each other. And in addition, we as humans, we do a lot of water management. Also, we use the water, we pump it out, we discharge it again, we use it we have to clean it again in our wastewater treatment plants. So in addition to the already complex natural processes, we have a lot of anthropogenic process ongoing on top. And in order to tackle all these challenges, to solve all these problems related to water management, what we normally do, we pick one of the water components, try to simplify it in a way that we can model it, and then assess certain problems. For example, if you take only the overland flow, you use 1D, 2D hydraulic models and focus then on the surface water processes. So normally when you do a flooding protection study or whatever, you would try to neglect the infiltration processes and the buffered groundwater reactions because they are of minor importance if you say you have a strong burst event and infiltration processes are negligibly small. And you can use that especially for flood protection purposes, right? Another option is you take only the 1D or 2D soil column and concentrate on the infiltration, recharge, and evapotranspiration processes. This is normally used when you want to assess vegetation growth, agriculture, or simplified climate change as forecasts. And of course, we have the classical groundwater modeling. That means you focus only on the groundwater flow. You get recharge normally as a boundary condition, as an input. You cannot normally simulate changes in the recharge because it's a fixed boundary condition, right? So you lose 1 degree of freedom, and normally you also simplify the overland flow a lot. but it's enough in order to assess water supply, groundwater abstractions, contaminations in the underground or for mining purposes. And the idea of Mike Shee is to couple all these within one modeling framework. That means all these processes can interact with each other. You need less boundary conditions, therefore you consider more processes. And this is the only way to really assess also these mutual influences. So you have a bilaterally coupling. That means if the groundwater rises, you have higher evapotranspiration, you have more exfiltration into the river system, and vice versa. And for special applications, this is really essential, that you consider these processes and then you have a model that can assess these problems. So basically you can, of course, assess all water challenges due to the modular approach. I will explain in a minute. You can also simplify it, certain processes like you do it in other common models also. So here's the typical sketch of our model that reflects a little bit the raster-based modular approach. So you have different engines for each process, like you have precipitation and evapotranspiration, you have an overland flow module, you have a 1D unsaturated zone solver for the topsoils, and you have a fully 3D groundwater model. So you can really consider all relevant processes that are interesting when you are solving problems within the water management sector. What it is based on? It's not new, this concept. It was too computational demanding in the last decades. So this principle goes back to the 70s, where let's say a European consortium of, I think, British, French, and Danish researchers were developing a new approach how to assess all water components within one approach. And this is called Système Hydraulique Européen. My French is not very good, but that's the name of Shee, right? That's the part. There are also different solutions that are using the same approach, but so far it's not that common, especially now during the climate change problems. And when you are living in dry areas, there this approach gets essential. Why? I will try to show you during this presentation. So it's really a there are physical-based processes, and you can simulate them on a regional scale because you simulate each process on a different time step. This is maybe the new thing that is not implemented to so many models. And the idea is to remove really the uncertainty linked to boundary conditions, and again, removing also a little bit the bias linked to modelers' assumptions when they have to simplify processes. Because you really use data and try to reflect or represent the real process that is ongoing in the nature. So you have a 2D lateral overland flow, like in a hydraulic model. You have a 1D linear flow concentration with structures, because you have a 1D hydraulic model where you can build in weirs, gates that can be controlled by logical rules. You have a 1D unsaturated zone, fully 3D groundwater, and all these modules can talk to each other and exchange water. And every process runs its own appropriate time steps. So again, the philosophy of Mike Shee is to replace the boundary conditions by assumptions, and assumptions by the real well-known processes. Here a screenshot from the graphical user interface. Also pretty nice. If you pre-process your data consistently, accordingly, then you can also change the grid size throughout the simulation. So you're not fixed to your model domain or your element resolution. And you would start then with the topography. You build in the DEM based on LiDAR data or satellite data. Then you can simulate the 2D overland flow and the infiltration processes in a good way. You have the input of climate data. You can use, on the left side, you see a single time series, which is station-based. So you can say, for the whole domain, I take only one time series, or you have certain locations where you want to apply that for a certain area. You can define that with the raster data, or you make it really spatially and transient varying, like on the right side. So you can use really remote sense data as input for reference evapotranspiration or precipitation. The next thing is you would take the land use into account, like on the right side. So you have grid codes again, showing you where you have greenlands, where you have forests. And then for each grid code, you give it a typical distribution for leaf area index and root depth, like you can see it on the lower left side. In addition to the land use, you have optional the possibility to use also an irrigation module. That means you can, for each grid code again say, this field I would like to irrigate once the water content in the unsaturated zone falls below a certain threshold. You can take out the water from a shallow groundwater, from a deep groundwater well, which is also really simulated in parallel in the model on each time step, or you take it out from river, or you combine them with a hierarchy. So also that is possible. When to take out the water, you can define based on user specified values. You can define a crop stress factor or the maximum allowed deficit. So there's really, you have every option that you need in order to reflect all real problems. And maybe the biggest strength of Mike Xi is this direct bilateral coupling to our Mike 1D engine, our 1D hydraulic model, like you maybe know it from Hagras. Where you have 1D linear polylines defining your branches, which you then assign on the lower left picture with cross sections, so that you have really a simplified 2D cross section profile. And like on the lower right side, you can even implement gates or weirs that can be controlled by structures. So it's really possible, like on the right picture, even gates with three weirs and so on. And you can simulate them in a way like on the lower left picture. There should be an animation where you really have the longitudinal profiles that's really reflecting your riverbed, your water level over the time. And you can also simulate, as I said, inundation due to wear control if you want to hold back water. What you can see here is a typical catchment study where you really put only rain onto it. It can infiltrate into the soil. You have here a 1D model representing the rivers here. And you have, in addition, also in the urban areas, an underground pipe system that's also simulated. So that means when here rain falls down to the ground, it will concentrate in the overland flow. It can infiltrate on the way. Groundwater heads can rise. It can infiltrate into the sewer system here, can exfiltrate again here, run through the city, go into the river. So we can really represent every possible flow path that is would be possible in the reality. In this case, it was a study to protect this area from floods, and we were dimensioning kind of a flood retention basin here, and it was a quite successful project. We go one step lower. We go into the underground now. You also have a unsaturated zone module that lets you, via grid codes, again, consider different soils, which you then can assign with a soil moisture retention curve, which you can even vertically discretize and differentiate. So you have really a saturation dependent conductivity in the underground. And you have a fully 3D Darcy approach for the groundwater flow. It's comparable to the ModFlow engine. Actually, it's based on the ModFlow engine. And you can see on the left side, also another catchment, one of my projects, you have a vertical and horizontal conductivity for 3 layers. You have even an additional module in order to put their wells, which then show you where is your aquifer and your filter length for each well. And that lets you, of course, simulate the hydraulic head over the time in a 3D way. You also can put on every module the water quality. So you can define as many species as you want. You can do a particle tracking to follow the flow paths from where your contaminants or your water is coming and where it ends up. It should be a video. Here it is. So what you can see here, you have an irrigation field. And then you have over the time nutrients being applied to the surface that then run into a pond. And again, based on this, with the help of this fully integrated approach, you really can put the nutrients to the surface. It can run via the overland flow into the pond. It could even run then into the Mike 1D approach, run through a small channel, discharge in the river, and you would even see if then the nutrients are infiltrated again into the groundwater, and you could see increased infiltrations then along the river again. So you can really follow the species path through your whole catchment. So it's really a unique, provides a unique insight into a wide range of water resources and environmental concerns. So you can mainly be applied in water resources, but as you see, there are special applications like for agriculture and irrigation, engineering, if you want to see how big your weir should be, or if you would like to change the inundation level upstream of your weir. You can investigate rivers and dams. Wetland is a big topic that is coming up now due to the climate change crisis. And again, of course, every environmental resource management aspect. And for mining, when you have to do a special recharge assessment. So like a client's testimonial, of course, in Denmark, it's widely applied. There we have even a national model. The DHI modeling tools have helped us with difficult management decisions and prioritization of projects at Silver Creek. We now have a clearer picture of the system, effects of land management changes on the system, and where we need our attention in the future for a better Silver Creek. So you can really understand detailed vertical unsaturated flow processes like it is required for agricultural questions, estimate evapotranspiration and groundwater recharge like you need it for mining or for drinking water supply. But in addition, you can also simulate rainfall, runoff, and flooding for flood protection studies, or even forecast snowmelt and its impact on the spring runoff. So MikeG is our fully integrated modeling approach, and we think, and I personally think, it's the solution for many problems that we could not solve in the last decades. So this was my first presentation. I don't know, Jason, shall we allow now questions, or should I better continue already with the next one?
If you're comfortable, Philip, I'm happy for you to allow questions for a few minutes.
Yeah, sure.
Has anybody got any questions? I can't see any raised hands, Philip. I think continue to your next presentation. Thanks.
Of course, happy to do so. Okay, and the second part is about recent developments. So of course, we're all throughout the time always improving our software based on the internal and external feedback of users, since we have also a big modeling department within DHI, where I'm part of. So I would like to share with you the latest changes or developments that we've done in the last couple of years. Important, honestly, we do not focus so much anymore on new features because the options are quite variable already. In the moment, we are really trying to improve the user experience and the user friendliness. That means we want to support our experienced users in their daily work by adding more functionality in the graphical user interface, helping them to debug the model if they run into numerical issues, which is always the case if you run with physical-based models. Or we even concentrate on specific use cases like special canyon regions or open borehole script we did for a Swedish mining project. We did a parallelization of the particle tracking because in Denmark, every vulnerability study is done with MikeG. And of course, we are constantly improving our coupling capabilities to rivers and the urban drainage system. So we always have release notes that are showing every detail. I will not go through that now through every single row, but I would like to share with you the highlights. In the past, you maybe know that we had also urban coupling system, urban systems, urban modeling software, which is called Mike Urban, that moved now into the Mike Plus software together with our Mike 11 for rivers. And now, since the last release, you can even couple one Mike Plus model, which is containing sewer systems and rivers with one MikeG. You can, as I said, now also, this was, I think, developed 2 years ago already, insert satellite-based data directly, that you have really spatially and temporary varying rasters, which is now based on this global dataset initiative that we have from the NASA and all the data, a quite comfortable approach to improve your climate simulations. We also can assign now groundwater monitoring stations for each layer. You do not have to find any more for each depth. We added more gridded outputs, as I said, that help the users. So this is based on the feedback of the external user group. So we really listen to what they need. And this is a raster that shows you then, of course, along the rivers, where you have the highest dynamics in your model and where you should put more attention to it. We also improved our post-processing tools that are embedded in our graphical user interface. So if you are comparing different hydrographs in the calibration period, which is maybe the most important phase of each modeling project to ensure that you're really providing sophisticated results. So you can fix now the ranges throughout the whole simulations and compare visually the hydrographs better. And we have implemented a new slider option. That means if you have two result rasters, you can overlay them. And here you see this horizontal bar that you can slide up and down and directly see where the differences start to show up and how your data sets are varying in space. Thanks again. I will prepare already the next presentation. Now we're going into the practical applications, and I would like to share with you 3 case studies. But of course, feel free to take the chance if you have questions to ask them already.
Philip, I've got one question. You're talking about increasing the user experience. One of the aspects that, particularly with these larger models, when we run them, they do take quite a lot of time, and we do need quite large sort of resources and stuff. I know with some of your other setups, you've moved to using the graphics processing units, the GPUs. Is that something that you're looking at with Mike Shee as well?
This was in discussion, but I think there were good reasons why they did not implement it so far. I do not even know if it's even not possible. I cannot tell you honestly, but it's a good question. And if you let me, I will come back with an answer. I know that a big struggle, of course, as I said, when you want to simulate these physical-based processes on a large scale, runtime is always an issue. But what we also plan to do is in the next couple of weeks and months, I will offer webinars and getting started kind of online tutorial or like an online manual, how you can debug your model and how you can increase the runtime while ensuring that your results are basically the same because you will try to simplify processes that are not of higher importance for your certain study kind of. So normally when you have a runtime issue, as you know, there could be things improved that helps the model to run way faster, but this GPU thing is a good issue. I will raise that internally. But let's say the parallelization is already implemented as much as possible. So it's at the moment, the easiest way is to improve your modeling concept in order to ensure lower runtimes.
Right, I see that Cleo Naidu's asked a question. I just want to confirm if you can model groundwater and surface water both in 3D, or will one have to be 2D? So I think, yeah, I mean, I'll let you answer that, Philip. I can also answer it, of course.
Yes, you can. You have always the groundwater. You can also simulate in 2D if you want, if you have only one shallow aquifer, but you can also add there 20 layers. So it's really, you have the full functionality of a classical mud flow model. That means you can add there 16 layers with different hydraulic connectivity, specific yield, specific storage. The unsaturated zone is always a 1D vertical soil column, but the overland flow is of course also always 2D. You can simplify all of the process, as I said, to more simplified approaches if needed. But basically, yes, you can extend it to the full 3-dimensionality. I don't know if you want to add something, Jason?
No, I think you've covered it. Thanks. Yeah. Shall we proceed?
Okay.
Thanks.
Sure. So we covered the first agenda point already. When it comes now, let's talk a little bit about really practical applications, right? If you have, for example, you're responsible for the mine water management, especially the dewatering process, you're interested in your recharge processes, how much water comes each day, each month, with which frequency and dynamics in order to determine how big the pumps should be. So if you would like to really do a thorough recharge assessment within the mine water management, you should really include all critical drivers and feedback. So like you see this in this picture, on the right side, you have an active open pit mine. You want to ensure that it's dry while you're excavating the resources. And you have, like you see on the left side, maybe even a rehabilitated soil zone already. You have vegetation that's taking out water. You have different hydrogeological layers. And in order to really assess the recharge processes, of course, you need also include to all sources and sinks so that you do not, let's say, plan too big pumps because you're overestimating the water that is coming into your mine. So we had, for example, one project reference or example in the last couple of years in Mpumalanga. It contains one of the largest coal reserves in southern Africa. It's mined extensively by many companies, and it's a largely open pit operations. And we pretty often have the modeling target, especially when two companies are sharing one pit, and they have to define who is responsible or who has to pay how much money for the dewatering process. So there, MikeShe is the perfect tool, right? Because water is critical to the mine. In this case, it's dry to semi-arid. That means you have less than 200 millimeters per year, but 60% of the rainfall fall between November to February. That means you cannot work with an annual mean recharge value, right? You need to know at least monthly, better daily values, how much water you have to pump out of your pit. Water is both a byproduct and necessary for the mine operations. That means on the one hand, you need it for the coal washing and the dust suppression. But on the other hand, of course, you want to dewater your pit and keep it dry also during storm water runoff events. And you have, of course, this spoil acid forming. So you want to know where your possible contaminants come up and show up in the landscape. So in this, another project case was where you were even involved, Jason, right? Is the Middleburg mine complex. There, several challenges in the water management of the mine were addressed because we had this upper right, you see this smaller pit area. You had rehabilitated zones and areas, and the question was if there is even water pumped in cycles and how you could improve here the water management in order to reduce costs and don't need to pump the water twice or even 3 times, right? And what you need in order to assess such a spatial water balance, you always start with DEM, as I said it in the previous presentation. Then you add, of course, your surface water features, which are also relevant if you have the rivers or lakes. You add your vegetation in order to consider also the evapotranspiration and recharge processes accordingly. You add soils and the underground. And what you then get is a spatially distributed recharge map, which is also varying in time. So we did this, or you did that better for this area also, which was highly valuable for the client. It really illustrates the local impact of the rehabilitation areas. So what you see on the right is the total average recharge and discharge. Red are very high values, above 0.6 millimeter per day, and blue, very negative values, of course, because groundwater is exfiltrating in the top, running into the rivers. So it's negative recharge. It's a loss in terms of the groundwater. And you really see that the red areas, which were the rehabilitation areas, there we had a lot of recharge production, which you then must really be prepared for where to plan your wells, where to locate the dewatering measures, and so on. So what you get is, in comparison to, let's say, different models that are using more a conceptual approach, we have really a dynamic water balance. You have daily discharge. So what you see in this diagram is the 95 and 5% limits of the variation kind of. You have in light gray in the background the highly dynamic recharge. So this is really the reality how recharge occurs. You have the mean recharge in this horizontal thick line in the middle, and you see the variation around this mean. So when you plan your pumps for this mean value, of course you underestimate a lot how much water you have to pump when you have strong rain events, like you see it on the right side when the red line goes above the mean value. So in summary, what we learned out of all these projects is That's not new. Infiltration amounts increases the cost of pumping, so a thorough planning of the pumping process is really essential. You should consider also vegetation cover and compaction and site grading, because they can reduce the groundwater recharge and increase the runoff. So you can even, let's say, think about land use changes around your mine in order to reduce the pumping costs, and capital investments can really be reduced through this more efficient planning, and also maybe storage of water, so that you put it temporarily aside in order to cut off, let's say, the peak pumping periods. And of course, the risk of environmental releases can be reduced by managing storage more effectively in addition. So our lessons learned was, maybe sometimes you make a study more with a lumped or conceptual or function-based models, but they have obviously significant limitations, especially in the resolution, spatially and temporally. So useful models can also be created based on limited data. I've shown you in the first presentation what you need. If you're lacking some of the data, you can even simplify it. And if the dewatering planning is highly influenced by the surface water flow processes, an integrated hydrological approach is really essential. Otherwise, you will not assess the amounts correctly. Another big topic which is coming up all over the world is the rewetting of wetlands. So what you see here is an already partly rewetted area in Germany, where they were still excavating the peat, but next to each field, rewetting also already the area. And it's really a special challenge, this wetland modeling, because you do not have a fixed groundwater table, you do not have a fixed recharge. It's highly dynamic over time and space. And in order to explain it a little bit, what you see here in green is the surface, in gray is the possible riverbed. In the lower area within your wetland, you have maybe a gauge, a monitoring station for the discharge. And the dashed light blue line is the groundwater table under average hydrological conditions. And if you then have, let's say, higher rain events, of course, the groundwater table rises. It really starts here to exfiltrate into the ground, run into the river, and also lifts up, of course, the groundwater then in the lower areas. So this, let's say, change, this transformation of water from precipitation into groundwater, from groundwater into the river, running downstream and infiltrating again in the wetlands is crucial to really reflect these processes in your area. And then, of course, the groundwater rises all over the where, all over where. And when we then are, let's say, in the transition from a wet to a dry period, right? Then you have, again, a lot of higher evapotranspiration, which then leads to falling groundwater tables again, because in McShee or an integrated model approach, the evapotranspiration is really linked to the current groundwater table elevation, which is simulated in every time step. We can also simulate this on a small study. This is here also in southern Germany, where we wanted to rewet a degraded peatland or wetland area in more detail. So we were planning a lot of small structures. We did a high resolution calibration. So what you can see here is the depth to groundwater in meters. 0 is the ground surface. So what you can see, you can really simulate groundwater levels above ground. So it's because it's transformed into overland flow. We can perfectly reflect also the evapotranspiration processes when it's getting warmer in March and April. If you have single rain events, you can see each small peak. So you do not really calibrate versus monthly values. You go really on an hourly or daily basis. And also the whole drop down in the hot summer months, you can reflect perfectly, and also the rise again. So it's really, you get very sophisticated results. You have here a river system. We planned here a weir together with the client, the authority. We wanted to rewet the area. You see here the depth to groundwater again. Turquoise light blue is flooded. Red, orange, depth to groundwater rises. That means the groundwater table is lower. Here you have the location of the weir. Here we have the reference state with a high depth to phatic surface around 1 to 2 meters. And here you can see already in the first time step the orange, yellow values where we lifted up the groundwater. And you can even subtract the two rasters from each other, like you see it here in the difference, and see it over time. So you can really see here the difference grid, how it changes over time. You can see when you have rain events, when the depth to phatic surface is coming up and your areas are flooded, then the drainage system and the rivers are taking out the water. And you can really see also how much is your effect, not an average, but also for dry years. How much can you bring it up? Or for wet years, when you have a rain event, do you have the problems with flooding? Do you have to lower your wear? So you can really assess the actual wear level and gate level in order to optimize perfectly where you want to keep the groundwater and to prevent, in the same time, flooding issues. So at the end, you can make, again, this fully integrated water balance, show how evapotranspiration changes when you plan some measures. So we even implemented new rivers, kind of small pumping holes and weirs, and then show the differences over the time. Of course, we did it also in your area. So the Okavango Delta National Conservation and Strategy Agency was our client. It's a long ongoing project with several follow-up projects. You see here a nice picture when it's meandering through the panhandle and the encroaching papyrus in one of the many bifurcations. And on the left side, you can see our model, right? So you have the Okavango Delta when it's spreading out in the area. You have again rivers and wetlands that you have to consider. And here again, the comparison, what we did, we tried to calibrate and reflect the real flooded area, like it's, let's say, observed based on satellite data, and then simulated it in a model. So what you see here is the flooded area, and we compared our simulation results with the observed data. Like in pink, you see the observed flooded areas based on satellite data, and the blue dots are our simulated ones, and they match each other very good. And there you can see again this benefit of such a model. You can fill the data gaps where you had no information. So you know throughout the time how big the flooded area was, and you can also run scenarios if you would like to do. Here's just a picture, also the statistics showing that there was no bias in the calibration at higher or lower flow rates. And we matched these values quite good, right? So you see here always simulated versus observed, the different subzones, and the values are very close to each other. So the difference was less than 20%, in average less than 4% even. The last topic I would like to share with you is the lake reservoir in Germany, which was impacted by prolonged drought since 2018. We are now in the northeast of Germany, a small lake water reservoir. And they have, of course, as many all over the world, were observing heavily falling water levels, and they could not identify what is the problem. There's even a big drinking water supply, which was in the discussion to supply also water for the new factory for Tesla. And it was crucial to identify why the water levels are sinking. Is there enough water for the water supply, for the factory, and also for the drinking water supply? And again, it was crucial to find a solution. That's why we won that project, that is able to reflect really these changes, that if the groundwater level falls, rivers lose the contact to the groundwater. So these processes fall away. You have a higher gradient from the lake water level to the groundwater. That means the exchange rates increase. And all these processes are reflected in such a model where you use bilaterally coupling approaches for all the modules. We then constructed, as the question from the audience, it was a fully 3D groundwater model. We used here a third-party software, Leapfrog, in order to set up the geological model, then transferred that into a Mike-Shi model, assessed all the groundwater monitoring stations and calibrated versus lake water level, measured discharges in the rivers and measured groundwater heads. We were able to reflect the lake water level very good. And of course, also groundwater levels. So we really said this model is ready to go for scenarios and to evaluate where the water is coming from. We used particle tracking. We did yearly mean balances to see where the water is coming from, where it is going, which was highly valuable for the population, the ministry, even public TV centers and so on. And then, of course, this is the big benefit. You can run scenarios. So you do what-if scenarios. For example, you turn off the wells. What happens then to the lake water level? And indeed, we could bring evidence to the fact that there is a certain influence. It's not the main driver. The main driver was climate change, obviously. But you can make then difference maps and show the rise in mean groundwater levels if there would be no well extraction. And you can simulate the lake water level in the reference run and also in each scenario. So this scenario was about turning off the groundwater abstractions, but you can also make land use changes. So what you see here in dark green is coniferous forest, which of course triggers a lot of evapotranspiration and reduces the overall recharge. But if you think about deforestation and turn it into greenland, what happens to the lake water level? And also what happens to the recharge processes? You see here the recharge. It goes from red over green, light blue, dark blue. So you have here in yellow, very small values around 0.1, 0.2 mean recharge rates. But if you take away the forest and change it to greenland or bushes and scrubs, you can increase the recharge because you have less leaves that are evaporating to the atmosphere, and you get with blue higher values around 0.4, 0.45 millimeters per day. And again, you do a scenario. You show the people what would happen. You see here, the change is smaller than compared to the previous run. So you have in green a slightly higher lake water level at the end of the dry year 2018. But you can assess also the effect and the effectiveness of each measure and decide then where to invest your money. And here I would close my presentation, and I'm happy to take any questions if there are any. And of course, if you do have questions afterwards, feel free to reach out to Jason and his colleagues or me. We are happy to take any question and lead any discussion if needed.
Excellent, Philip. Thanks. Some German efficiency there, I see, with completing your presentations on time in your allocated time. So that's brilliant. Thanks very much. I see that we have got a question here. How can one use MikeShe to assess land use changes and the impact on runoff? Is there a step-by-step on how to input data, or I just start pushing buttons?
Yeah, this is a very good question. We have there an online course. It's a self-paced getting started course that shows you on a prepared model, on our typical tutorial model, Carup, how to apply a model once the data is pre-processed. But what I will do now, the next weeks and months, I will create a hands-on tutorial online together with webinars and YouTube videos, how you could build up your model from scratch, from A to Z. So we know all that workflows. We simply should share this better with our community. And this will happen throughout the next months. Yeah, by September, October, you will have such a video where you can be sure how to build up such a model. And of course, we have a support. So I'm part of the global support from MikeShe together with other colleagues. So whenever you raise a question or you run in a struggle, write us an email to mike@dhigroup.com, and we normally answer within 24 hours. So for sure, if you run into struggles, you're not alone.
Excellent. Julia, I see that you've got your hand up. Please go ahead.
Yes. Thank you, Philip. I'm Julia. Thank you for the presentations. One thing I'm somebody who does use MikeShe, and one thing I often struggle with is the soil and sediment property values, conductivities. And I often find I have to use values that are quite different than sampled values for that soil type, or ones I've been able to sample myself. And I was wondering what your experience is with that, and if there's any move to start building up shareable databases of parameters for different soil types that have worked well in MikeShe, like, texture classes or those kinds of things. Just because I think not so many other models out there use Richard's equation in the same way, and then there's macropore flow and other things. And so if you try and bring parameters that have worked in other tools or in literature, they often don't work well in MikeShe. I've had to use values that I was surprised by sometimes.
Thank you very much for that question. I was asking for that many times, and as I said, now I have the option, now I have the possibility. We are at the moment already setting up such a global database where you will be able to download soil sample data. What you would need, of course, you would need the information if it's loamy sand, let's say with a density of 1,500 grams per milligrams and so on. You would need a little bit of, let's say, a feeling or experienced guesses how your soil would look like, but normally you have globally always everywhere a soil map that roughly tells you which soil you have. And yes, when you install MikeShe in the default root folder, you will always have the UNSODA and the USDA soil database, which is already a first indication. But as you've seen, we've calibrated now many models already, maybe you also, and we improved these soil water retention curves a little bit more based on the MikeShe needs and the numerical reality kind of. And we will share these soon within the next couple of months, and you will get a link. And in addition, I will share also a webinar how you can calibrate your unsaturated zone. So whenever you have a time lag in the groundwater heads, this indicates you that you have to reduce or increase the porosity within your unsaturated zone soil, or change a little bit the partly saturated K value.
Excellent. I see that Chloe has a request. Could we request input data to practice with? Yeah, my answer to that, Chloe, is actually got quite a lot of material set up both locally in South Africa as well as Philip has shown you internationally, where we can share sort of pre-set up models for you to train on and work on. So that shouldn't be a problem. And then, yeah, Philip, I think just to add to your comments there is there are more and more globally available data sets that are assisting in actually setting up and enabling the setup of these distributed sort of hydrological models, everything from satellite rainfall data. And I can show you, well, Philip, I'll discuss it with you, but I find quite a nice data set on global soils and stuff like that, which is also excellent. So a lot of this information that you require to set these models up now is quite a lot more available than it used to be previously, and making it a lot easier to initially set up and apply these models.
And I think, Jason, you can download also for free, of course, the MikeShe software and install directly the Carop example. This is our test site, and can already directly try to play and run the models. Of course, it's limited in terms of model cells and resolution, but you can download the prepared data sets already and start trying, if you like, to model it at the fully integrated approach.
Yeah, I mean, just also to add to that, we do support trainings. There's obviously international trainings that are held by DHI. Julia is actually also a trainer that's been registered with DHI. So she's will occasionally have a model run in South Africa where we do use South African examples as well. So, you know, we do support that and try to get you going with those models as effectively as possible. And then there's also, if you're a student and doing our master's or a PhD, then we generally motivate for you to be able to use the software in your theses, etc. Yeah. Philip, one of the things that I was quite intrigued by, because it's something that we've seen in the South African scenario, was I think we're actually also going to touch on a little bit later with Alana's presentation, but is the removal of different sort of vegetation, etc., like tree species and stuff like that, and that recharge to the groundwater and support from that. So I was just wondering, I mean, just from your perspective in terms of the types of projects that you've been looking at on a more sort of global scale. I mean, there was some quite detailed stuff and then obviously some larger sort of scale stuff. What sort of typical sort of applications of the models are you seeing applied more internationally?
You mean the exchange of vegetation cover, or?
Well, just in general, I mean, where you've seen MikeShe being applied and used in your experience?
So let's say you have a very large scale catchment and you want to only see one discharge curve. Then, for example, you would always see more simplified or conceptual GIS-based solutions. But when you're the key thing, the speciality of MikeShe, when you really should go for that and use it, is when your results are really affected by the highly dynamic processes. That means, for example, you have horizontal discharge curves in the river. Then you cannot use this typical linear storage approach anymore, because you have not this logarithmic falling discharge curves. You need a groundwater model that is reflecting these base flow processes over the years and over the time. So whenever you want to, let's say, plan a measure or assess the water balance on a local scale, but let's say on a regional scale, we're talking, as normally our MyShi models are 1,000 or between 50 and 5,000 square kilometers. But you really need to assess the single water balance items. Then you should go for MyShi. And this is where it always comes into the game. So pretty often, normally competitors or other consultants are using a more simplified approach, submit their project, the client is unhappy, and they are searching for alternatives, and then we come into the game.
Yeah. All right, excellent. Thank you. All right, are there any more questions? If not, what I'll do is I'll save some time on this set of presentations. Let Julia start a little bit earlier, and then we can have more questions towards the end. Yeah, that's great. Are there any other questions? Julia, are you ready to present? Julia, you're on mute if you are talking.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm just organizing my window.
Okay, that's good.
Getting into presentation view.
Right, cool. All right, Philip, thank you very much. I think that was a very informative presentation, and certainly took us through some really good case examples, which I think are relevant to the South African scenarios. Yeah, I think it was well done. And you have, we have worked on some other applications in the South African area. You saw that Middelburg setup. We've done some work on the Gamagara River up in near the Sishen mining complex in the Northwestern Cape, and various other sort of setups, which we're quite excited to show you. Julia is a local South African, Dr. Julia Glenday, who I'm now going to present, or was going to present to you now. And she's done some excellent work on the MyShi model locally. And she's going to take you through one of the applications that she's done. Thanks very much again, Philip. And yes, please proceed, Julia.
Hi, everyone. Can you see the presentation on your end?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As Jason said, my name is Julia. I'm a hydrology research associate with Sion and Rhodes University, and I'm also doing some consulting work. I've been using MyShi for various projects since I started using it for my PhD, and I'm going to present some of that work today, but that was about 10 years ago, so it's a bit rusty. You can ask me the details and I'll look them up. But today I'm going to talk about applying MyShi to model the impacts of channel incision and floodplain restoration in two different catchments. I'm going to focus more on the Baviaanskloof catchment because we focused more on the incision part in that modeling, but just touch on the other one because we used some different approaches. And then I'm mostly going to focus a little bit more on the methodology parts for people who are either use MyShi or are new to MyShi in terms of how we tried to approach modeling this in these case studies. So as some background to these projects, the work I'm going to present is coming from quite a few different projects in my PhD research that was supported by the University of California, Santa Barbara, the NGO Living Lands, and SEON, which is South Africa Environmental Observation Network. I'm also presenting some work from the PhD of Dr. Faith Jumbi, who's also on this call, on the Chrome catchment that was completed through the University of Western Cape, also with support from SEON and the Water Research Commission. And Faith, please jump in if I missay anything about the Chrome. And this work is also, there was a lot of field work that happened by a lot of people, and I'm not going to present on a lot of the field work. I'm going to take some of the results and just talk about them as if we knew them. So just to say there is a lot of work behind the scenes on this in the field as well as the modeling. A little bit of background on channel incision, and it's a nice follow-on to what Philip was presenting earlier. what I mean by this is the process of a channel getting deeper and often wider, and it occurs when the energy of a river's high flows is enough to pick up and carry away the sediments of the bed and the banks on a regular basis, and it's not balanced by more deposition of sediment at that same site in the lower flow periods. So it has to do with the balance of water and sediment supply to the site from the contributing catchment, as well as the geomorphology of the site itself. When you have incision in one place, you generally have deposition of that sediment somewhere else downstream, but sometimes it makes it all the way out to sea, and sometimes it ends up in a reservoir where we generally really don't want it. It can be a natural process, and that's actually how river channel starts in the first place. So it's not always a bad thing necessarily, but you have to look at it in the context of the landscape. So like climate cycles like El Nino can cause heavier rain events. You can have wildfires that change the vegetation cover and increase runoff rates. You can have tectonic uplifts that change the slope of the landscape, and then the channel will incise following that over a long period, geologic timescales. But human activities can really trigger it or increase it. And so urbanization, which hardens the land surface, or clearing thick vegetation to farm, end up with increased surface runoff and flood peaks that drive river incision. People also dig drainage channels to keep areas they want to farm from flooding and that kind of thing, and it leads to higher flood peaks in rivers and causing them to incise. And then people can also straighten channels that were meandering, and you can end up with a higher slope in the river channel, higher velocity, and further incision, so the channel deepens. And so we care about channel incision for a number of reasons. It can have a lot of different impacts at the local scale, the immediate floodplain, and downstream of it, and as well as can have catchment scale impacts too. Definitely on the flood regime, as the channel capacity is larger, the larger peak flow will stay in the channel rather than flowing out over a floodplain. And sometimes you want this in some cases, but then you send that flood as a bigger flood to areas further downstream. So there'll be a more intense flood peak further down. And then there can be the reduction of overbank flooding can reduce deposition of silt and nutrients in the floodplain, which maybe you want. And it can reduce groundwater recharge in the floodplain area in the wake of a high flow. And sometimes that's quite a big recharge pathway for a local area. And higher flow velocities through the system can increase erosion and reduce water quality because you start picking up stuff and carrying it into dams in the ocean and just the downstream areas. And then during low flow periods, the incision can also change the groundwater surface water interaction. And the way this happens is really going to depend on the nature of the system that you're working in. So if the river channel lies in an area with a shallow groundwater table that's regularly above the level of the channel, then this deepened channel can start draining this floodplain groundwater in the drier periods, and it'll settle at a new lower level. And that can change the vegetation that can survive in the area because now the groundwater table is deeper and you can lose wetland vegetation and wetland habitats and also soil processes like peat formation that you might be interested in. And these also have a lot of other ecological processes that I'm not going to go into too much, but this will depend on where the groundwater table is sitting naturally in respect to the channel and what was driving the recharge of that groundwater table to maintain it after the incision is started. So in South Africa, as many of you on the call might know, there are some national programs. There are quite a few NGOs that engage in wetland restoration, and then there's a government program working for wetlands. Sorry, I stole that graphic from a US project, but I really liked it, but it's putting these check dams in. Philip also mentioned a project of putting check dams or like smaller blockages to try and re-wet a floodplain. The bottom pictures are from the Crom catchments with smaller and bigger structural interventions. The one on the left, you can see a structural intervention, and then downstream, you can see the incision of a channelized tributary coming in where the farmers have channelized it, but it's causing a lot of degradation downstream. So The two case studies I'm going to talk about are the Baviaanskloof and the Krom catchments. They're both located in the Eastern Cape, and they feed into some large reservoirs that are part of the regional water supply system that feeds Gqeberha, Port Elizabeth, also Cape St. Francis, Plettenberg Bay, these areas, the Algoa water supply system, Jeffreys Bay, etc. And these are semi-arid mountainous catchments. They both have agricultural land uses in their floodplains and quite a long history of use, and also in the foothills, with grazing in the foothills that's changed the vegetation cover. And so in both of these cases, there are wetlands that have been impacted with channel incision through them, and we wanted to find out how the incision and the potential restoration projects, or some of them that had already been implemented, could impact the hydrology in these systems. There was a variety of field measurement campaigns as well as modeling, and I'm just going to focus on the modeling part today, given time. So we chose to use MikeC for the reasons that Philip also mentioned, in that it's one of the few packages out there, at least when I started doing this work, that integrated channel hydraulics models and groundwater modeling and had surface groundwater interactions that's modeled dynamically. So the elevation in the river channel is calculated explicitly in the model, and so is the elevation of the groundwater table, time step by time step, and the exchange of the groundwater between the channel and the groundwater is based, it's done time step by time step based on their relative elevations. And there's not too many softwares out there that do that. As far as I know, MikeC doesn't actually model the process of ongoing incision. There are some geomorphology models that do that. They model the sediment getting carried away and the channel shape changing, but that's a quite like List Flood does that. But then they end up simplifying the hydrology in a whole lot of other ways. So if you know the dimensions of the channel and how they've changed and how you think they're going to change, you can input these into MikeC as scenarios rather than having MikeC model how the channel will deepen, but you could couple or whatnot. But in this case, we had measurements of the channel and how it's incised and some ideas of what it could have been before and what it might be with the restoration work. And it was one of the few tools there. And I started using it back when there was Mike 11, so excuse, sorry, there's some Mike 11 stuff in here. And now it's Mike River, and now it's all wrapped up into Mike Plus, which is nice. So that makes it a lot easier. So for the Baviaanskloof, it's a large catchment, or a mesoscale catchment, you'd say, and we focused on a smaller floodplain area within it to look at the incision. But it has in the floodplain, we monitored and we found out that it can switch from a gaining stream where the groundwater is feeding into the main channel to a losing stream where the main channel is losing water to the alluvial floodplain dynamically over time. So the main channel is non-perennial in quite a lot of the reaches. There are these steep mountain streams feeding into the main valley on either side of the main valley. So that's these green areas you see in the way I've shown a map of it, and you can see photos of some of these mountain tributaries coming into the main channel, the main valley floor. And it has this trellis drainage pattern. And this kind of drainage pattern is common in the Table Mountain Group geological region. There are quite a lot of catchments with this kind of shape in this area that are important for water supply. So looking at how to approach modeling it as some more generalization than just this one setting. And we'll show that the Krom has a similar shape. So despite it being relatively arid, there are areas near geological transitions and faults where the groundwater table in this central valley, this area in yellow here, the groundwater table sits close enough to support permanent wetlands. And the study focused on a particular part of the floodplain where there used to be more extensive wetland, sort of up to the 70s, 80s, and then there was a lot of support for developing farms and bulldozing and building berms and drainage. You can see the center pivots and stuff in the bottom picture further upstream, and it caused the area to develop quite a deeply incised channel. You can see the cut bank picture on the right, and there's evidence of peat at one point, but it's quite deeply buried. But there's a project to try and bring some of this wetland area back, and we wanted to model what might happen with that. So this is a picture of just showing some of the restoration works planned, also looking at some of the overgrazing issues that drove the flood peaks to go higher. You can see a fence line contrast between grazed and ungrazed. So it's a whole catchment issue, but I'm just focusing on this floodplain channel incision for this talk. So to model it in Mike C, because it's such a big area feeding to the floodplain, we did a nested modeling approach. And I think maybe some of what Philip was talking about as well used a bit of a nested modeling approach. So I just wanted to say a bit more about that, and that you can't model a catchment this big at a high resolution in a reasonable and so we built a model of the catchment, of the full Bavianskrog catchment that was quite coarse. I think it was 200-meter grid cells, and we used the linear reservoir groundwater models, and had some data on the groundwater coming into the floodplain area to check ourselves there. And then we used the most simplified overland flow routing, and then built a more detailed model of the floodplain, including these alluvial fans at the side, and we routed the surface water runoff from the coarse model to the heads of the tributary, like the heads of the alluvial fans, where the streams meet the main valley, and also from the upstream area of the floodplain section we were focusing on, and then the groundwater coming in from the regional or the full catchment model, conditions of flow coming in around the edges of our floodplain section. And then our reach of floodplain, we did a 50-meter grid cell size and 20-meter depth, given that the groundwater table in living memory hadn't dipped below that when we talked to all the farmers and their boreholes. You don't always have good data, like Philip showed. I think Denmark has a lot of different data than we have to work with, but you can ask people, like people will have boreholes, and you can ask them, has it ever gone dry? And do your grandparents know if it ever went dry? This kind of thing. So we did that type of work here. We also, I worked with somebody doing their PhD in geomorphology, and she did a lot of channel cross sections, loads of channels, like small channel cross sections and floodplain wide sections as well. And we put that into the modeling, and then we modeled, we put that into through the floodplain, and we did some scenarios of further incision. We got a bit extreme compared to what's 1 meter more may be realistic, but the 3 meter more was just trying to see if we push it. I don't think that's actually realistic, given you start getting down to cobbles, huge, like the sediment size goes up as you go down. It's a sandy, cobbly system, so we don't think it could incise that much more. And then a restoration scenario where the channel it takes on the characteristics of the inset, small inset channel, so only 1 meter deep. So it seems like the flow regime could support that kind of channel now if some restoration work was done. And so this is just another picture showing my coarse model and the floodplain model in the Mike C interfaces at the time. These are older ones. Showing a bit more diagrammatic. We coupled them. Let me go on to some of the results. So part of the reason we did this was to get a reasonable runtime as well, and also just to be able to model the floodplain at a grid cell size that matches the channel cell size, or the channel width, or that's relevant to the channel width. Yeah. So we got good performance. We had different levels of data to calibrate against. We didn't fully capture the groundwater level, but it did reasonably well. So the dots on the bottom right-hand graph show the dots are observed groundwater levels in the floodplain area, and then you see different versions of our model. I'm not going to go into too much the multi-criteria calibration work. That's almost a separate thing, but I can answer questions on it if people want to at the end. But to go into some of the results that came out of the scenarios, which I think are the more interesting stuff at the moment. The restoration, reducing the channel depth and width, was predicted to reduce flood peaks, as we'd expect, and increase the average groundwater level in the floodplain. And it didn't have a significant impact on the mean annual stream flow compared to the current scenario. What might have been more surprising in a way is that the increased incision, it increased predicted flood peaks as we'd expect, but it dropped the groundwater level, but it actually was predicted to increase the mean annual stream flow by quite a bit. And part of this was because the ET was predicted to go down when the groundwater table went down. So that's an issue of how root depth is put into the model and what would actually happen. And we thought we'd accounted for that because we put a root depth all the way down the 20 meters, but there is a drop off in the access to the water with depth and how that's parameterized. And there were also areas that had thicker than 20 meter deposits actually at the sides of the valley where the alluvial fans were, and that was a decent amount of area as well. So the groundwater table dropped too low in those areas for the vegetation to access it. And so that may be real and it may not be real, but it's important to know that how your root depth is parameterized in these these things will definitely impact the output. And so we need to look more at what is really happening there. In terms of the flow duration curves, as you can see, the green line is the restored channel. So you decrease these higher flood peaks, but then you get an increase in the recession, a bit of the recession-based flow, because there's water getting stored in the groundwater that comes out more slowly when the channel is shallower, because the slope of the groundwater table is now lower, because this groundwater table is being fed by the surrounding mountains in this case. So this just shows that, again, so in a dry year, the incision, the deeper channel was predicted to increase the drainage of the groundwater. So you actually had increased base flow because the groundwater is being maintained by the mountains surrounding the channel in this case. So now you're just cutting into that more. So the supply stays the same, but you've cut into it so it's accessed for longer. So you actually increase some of the base flow, and this decreased modeled evapotranspiration resulted in this increased flow with the incision overall. Whereas the restoration slowed the peak flow and the groundwater outflow in wet years, and you get this sort of bulge post flood peak in the restored case. But then by the time you get to a really dry time, they're more similar. And so it seems like there's always pros and cons to different things. So in terms, you don't want these flood peaks carrying all the sediment down to the dam. So your increased total yield, if it's real, with the incision may not be a benefit compared to all the sediment you're going to get with the flood peaks. Yeah, so it's a nice application of the tool to be able to look at this surface water groundwater interaction and the interaction with evapotranspiration to try and understand these systems. So for the Chrome catchment, it's a similar setup to the Bavianskloof catchment, but it's a smaller catchment and it's wetter. And so when we looked at the surface water groundwater relationship, it's a gaining stream all the time, as far as we could tell. It didn't have this disconnection.
This is your 5-minute call here, just telling you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
yeah. No, there's not as much I'm not going to go into the detail with this one. I just wanted to say that because it's a smaller catchment, we approached the modeling, or actually, Faith approached the modeling in a different way. So I just wanted to say that, but it also has a lot more, it's a wetter catchment with a lot more wetlands, and it also has more agriculture going on that's resulted in a lot of incision throughout the length. And then it also has alien plant invasion. So some of the and Alana's going to speak about modeling that in Mike Xi in another catchment soon. And maybe one day Faith will present the research more fully here. And so because the alien invasion was a big question for this catchment as well, and is in fact has replacing wetland area, and changing the channel through these areas too at the same time. The scenarios that were modeled here weren't purely looking at the incision, it was incision plus vegetation cover change. But what I wanted to say is that those things actually go hand in hand. And we saw that the root depth, we kept the vegetation type the same in that Bavian's cliff modeling example, even though the channel shape had changed. And in this case, the scenarios, we didn't do that. Well, it was a combined vegetation cover change and channel change, which may be actually more realistic thing to look at, because when you change the restoration would be restoring the palmite vegetation and also changing the vegetation that's on the floodplain, and in this case removing alien trees as well. So if their rates of ET of those different vegetation types and their rooting characteristics and how they access water in wet and dry periods would change, you need to model those all wrapped up together rather than just the incision on its own necessarily. So that's all I really wanted to say about the Crom example, but the model setup was different. We didn't do the nested model. We did a 100-meter grid cell size and different channel profiles for the unsized areas and the palmite wetland, which is a very thick, these thick wetland basins with small little rivulet channels through them in their main basins. And so we used that for the restored areas, and then these bigger, wider channels, and found that in this case, restoring the wetland was predicted to increase base flow. Actually, no significant change in the flood peaks because the wetland was wet all the time. When it was a flow, it went over the top in the model, at least. In the highest floods, the medium floods, it did reduce them. But some of the highest floods, there wasn't a statistically significant flood peak change. But it increased mean annual flow. The restoration in this case increased the mean annual flow and increased the groundwater height in the model. So two different systems with different surface water, groundwater, and vegetation assumptions as well came out with different responses. Yeah, so just to recap, Mike Xi has been a helpful tool to look at this interaction between channel and surface water, groundwater. But yeah, the impacts can be highly system specific. So we need to understand quite a bit about the root depth and the sediment properties and the recharge processes to model this. Thanks.
Fantastic, Julia. Thank you very much for that presentation. It's great to see some local catchment applications of Mike Xi, and certainly it looks like there's an enormous amount of work that's been done in that area. Really sort of fascinating results. Also kind of showing different dynamics between the two catchments, which is quite nice to see, because I think sometimes we tend to lump elements in together. And then I also quite like you showing these kind of embedded models where you've got a less detailed model feeding a more detailed model in some of those areas to improve your run times and speeds and stuff like that. So those embedded models are fantastic to see, and the type of thing that's is great to a great example, that's for sure. Are there any questions? I can't see anything in the sections, and I can't see. Philip, you've got a question?
Not a question, but more a comment. Thanks a lot for this presentation, Julia. I like it a lot, especially how you, as Jason said already, distributed the smaller models and the big one, so that you really can consider the processes in the local focus area with a higher resolution, and the outside areas you model in a way that it's especially sufficient for your inside area, right? And what I also faced many times, as you did it in the project, probably, you plan a measure in the model, like you change the incision of your river channels, which then affects the groundwater levels, and then again has a feedback reaction to the evapotranspiration processes, so that when the groundwater is lowered, you reduce the recharge because you reduce the evapotranspiration, and so higher recharge is triggered. So sometimes you really, even if you're very professional and you have a good understanding of the hydrological processes, you build up a model, run it, and then you get insights that you could not even have imagined before. Thanks a lot for the presentation. Very nice. Happy to see that.
Thank you, Philip. And something I wanted to mention with the nested models for people who haven't used Mike Shi, it's not sort of an automatic feature, and maybe it will come at some point. I think it's quite a big coding job. But when I did it, there was like packages in MATLAB to sort of automatically, I could change the outputs of one model into the format that's needed for the inputs of the next one. But nowadays, it's much easier because there's packages in Python for people who use Python, and you could do that easy because MATLAB is a software you have to pay for, but Python is free and there's packages. So if I were to do it again today, it would be much easier than it was when I did it before. And that coding, yeah, being able to interact with Mike Shi inputs and outputs with Python is very helpful.
Thanks for that comment. Absolutely good that you raised it. There's this Mike.io package, this Python library, which is now developed on and used widely. So also this will be also an initiative for the next months, that we give you a platform to share what you have developed or what we developed, so that you do not have to script it from the very beginning in order to resample your datasets. Yeah, good point.
Yeah, Philip, I think just to comment on that, is there not already some sharing that's going on? I thought you had a GitHub that was open with some of those Python libraries and stuff like that. Is that correct? Okay, excellent. Yeah. Judah, I think another aspect associated with this particular model sort of setup is you've kind of highlighted the situation where using model processes, or what they call horses for courses, associated with the different modeling applications, which I think is really good. So yeah, I mean, in the case of the Mike sort of scenarios, there is actually a Mike package that would run your channel morphology. It's Mike 21C, if I remember correctly, where you can have a look at your sort of channel incisions and accrual sort of areas as well. But yeah, that would be run as a separate sort of model to the channel sort of morphology that you're predicting in the, or showing in the model that you've just done. But yeah, it was great to see that. And then also, I think quite critical with the Mike Shi model is that you can turn off and turn on processes. So I've seen people trying to do like full 3D groundwater models when they're looking at a flooding problem, and it's quite easy for you to just switch off some of the groundwater processes or conceptualize them as kind of linear reservoir sort of setups rather than full groundwater setups, and then just run the flooding on top of that, and it'll still give you the same answers. So that there you can decrease your run times, and yeah, conceptualization is quite critical. And I think what you've done here is you've actually conceptualized the problem very well in terms of a management problem, and then chosen the correct processes to run with that. So well done on that. And I just wanted to find out from your perspective, in terms of getting input datas in what I would call slightly more data scarce environments than perhaps we have in places like Europe. How easy has it been for you to get the information and conceptualize these or set up these models?
In these sites, it wasn't it wasn't easy at all. There was a lot of field work involved, and various like in the COM, worked with a master's student who was doing some channel morphology work, and the Baviansdorf also worked with another PhD student. We worked side by side. She did the geomorphology, Dr. Powell at Rhodes, and yeah, and we put in through Seon, we put in pressure transducers, we dug soil pits and piezometers and all of that stuff. So that that information isn't readily available in most places. Because it's an agricultural area in a semi-arid setting, a lot of farmers have boreholes that they use on and off. So that's helpful in terms of finding out about the groundwater, and that there are boreholes that aren't all covered in pumps and stuff that you can actually go and use, because they drill them during a dry time, but they don't use them all the time and that kind of stuff. So you can go and find boreholes in these landscapes. So and that was easier, but yeah, to get the data at the scale of trying to do something like this does require local field work. There's not a lot of this readily available. And then these valleys are quite narrow. So if you use global products like the soil or soil data or things like that, the scale at which some of the global products is like the narrow valley wouldn't get captured in that per se. We might say the whole area has thin mountainous soil, or so yeah. So I think getting enough data to do something like this, you could do it very conceptually, and then get an idea about the direction of potential changes with less local data than we did, I think. But yeah, it is something at this scale to get you have to go out and get the data yourself, the input data yourself, I think.
Excellent. Thanks, Julia. Are there any other questions from the audience? All right. Alana, are you on?
I am, yes.
Fantastic. All right. Are you ready to present if there's no other questions?
Yeah, I can, yes.
Okay, fantastic. All right, well, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Alana Rebello. She's done some work in the Cape area in the Berg River catchments, and also touching on some of the things that you would have seen Philip present on. And it's quite nice to see that some of the international stuff is also reflecting some of the things that we've seen in the South African scenarios. But great, thanks. Go ahead, Alana.
Thanks so much, Jason. Can you just confirm that you can hear me and see my presentation?
I can hear you. Your presentation on my side's a bit, it's not very clear. I don't know whether it's just my side.
Maybe someone else can say. I'm calling in from a fiber line, so it should be good. Is the next slide more clear?
It's a bit blurry.
Maybe we turn off all the cameras. Sometimes that helps. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not the greatest fan of Teams. Let me put off.
Maybe just switch off your camera, Alana, and let's see what happens.
It would be nice to be able to have my camera on. I've just presented in another platform and it was completely fine in Germany, so should be able to do South Africa. How's this?
That's better.
Yeah, that's better, yeah.
Okay. I'm going to just try and put on my camera again and see if it's fine. Maybe it's just a glitch. Okay. Is it clear still?
Yes,
I think perfect. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, then thanks for having me. I'm going to be presenting the results of a paper. So if you want to go into more detail on any of the points, yeah, please go and find this paper and have a look. A number of people on this call are co-authors, including Jason. So that's very nice. It was a very nice collaborative project. So I just want to make that clear. I'm just presenting on behalf of a lot of people, and a lot of work went into this. It's also a study from quite some time ago. So I hope I can answer any questions, but I might be a bit rusty. So yeah, the title is...
Alana, sorry, it's blurry again. I have downloaded your presentation. Would you like me to maybe share and then see if that improves it?
Yeah, I mean, you can.
It was better when your camera was off for some reason.
Yeah. Very strange. Let me do this again. If this doesn't work, then we'll have to do your offer, Jason. But I mean, it's a very fast fiber line. So I can only imagine it's Teams. Okay, is it less blurry now?
It's not crystal clear, but it's better than it was. Yeah. Oh yeah, now it's sharp. Now it's sharp.
Okay. I don't know. Okay, so let's hope that it just stays that way. So I also wanted to say that we've produced another paper actually comparing a bunch of different models for some of these catchments. And so if you're interested to read more about that, you can take a look at this paper. Jason, maybe after the slide, you can just let me know if we need to make a switch. Just by way of introduction, the goal here for this project was to try and understand if we can get a better quantification of the water impact of invasive alien trees. So we know that in South Africa, invasive alien trees use large amounts of water. They have loads of other impacts, and all of this translates to economic consequences. We know that we have solutions for dealing with invasive alien trees in our shrublands and in our grasslands. And this includes ecological restoration, but we know that this has to happen at scale in order to really produce the results that we need in terms of water impact. And we need funding to do that. It's very expensive. To upscale restoration to large scales. And it requires mechanical clearing in many cases, sometimes hard to reach areas. It's very costly. And although South Africa has a long history of this kind of ecological restoration, we don't have a very good track record of measuring the benefits in terms of water impact and others. And so if we want investment, we need stronger evidence of the benefits, if any. And so this project was looking at trying to quantify the water-related benefits of restoration, specifically through clearing invasive alien trees in fynbos. And the two pictures at the bottom are of pines invading fynbos ecosystems. So although it looks lovely and green, that's not a good color in this system. So at the time when we did this study, there wasn't that much information, high quality, high resolution information on the impacts of these alien trees on water and how that plays out spatially. So Julia mentioned these kind of these catchments just have such rugged terrain, high mountain peaks, deep valleys, and that makes these areas very difficult to map and also to model. And it means that on one mountain slope compared to the next, you can have completely different processes at play. And this makes it very difficult to really understand how the impacts of aliens might be different across these different spatial nuances. And so at the time, this study was trying to advance our understanding across these spatial scales. And things have even progressed since then, and we're using a lot more remote sensing now. But yeah, this study was about 5 years ago. And so the objective of the study...
Lana, can I just stop you there? I'm going to share my screen because I think there's some details in the slides that are coming up that you're not going to see because it is still blurry. I'm just going to quickly share. Can you see my screen now?
I can, but you have to go into presentation mode.
All right. Oops. I think... Okay. Is that better for everybody?
Seems fine on my side.
Yeah, it's sharp now.
Okay. So just say change and I'll press down. Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, apologies in advance because there's going to be a lot of clicking. Okay, so the objective here was to model the impacts of clearing invasive alien trees on specifically stream flow. And we selected 4 catchments pictured here in strategic water source areas, very important for the city of Cape Town and surrounding agriculture in the Western Cape of South Africa. And these catchments were carefully selected because of well-positioned stream flow gauges that had long records. So we really also wanted to be able to validate at least most of our catchments. And yeah, we used the MikeShe modeling tool to look at this. So Jason, if you could just click next. So the emphasis and the value add of this study was high quality data inputs. Just like Julia, we also went into the fields, quite a bit of emphasis on collecting the data that we needed, and this big focus that I mentioned on well-validated models. And so just some information on the modeling. So we used a fully distributed, it's actually still on the last slide, but it's okay. A fully distributed version of MikeShe, coupled with a Mike Hydro channel network. And as a trade-off in resolution. So we could have run this at a 12.5 meter resolution, but we didn't really have the processing power. So we then selected a grid size of 60 meters. And our simulations covered a period of around 15 years at a daily time step, with 2-hour time step for overland flow and unsaturated zone flow. So for the evapotranspiration process model, we used the Kirsten and Jensen numeric engine. For overland flow, we used fully distributed finite difference. For the soils, the unsaturated zone, we used the 1D finite difference Richards equation. And for the saturated zone groundwater, we used the 3D finite difference Darcy flow numeric engine. So that's just the model setup. And then for Mike Hydro, we used the river model type and the hydrodynamic river module. Okay, so that's just in terms of how we set up the model. Then we can just have a quick look at the inputs. So we spent a lot of time on rainfall. We collected data from as many different institutes that we could. So the ARC and the South African Weather Services being among the main ones. We also used some data from SAON because they've got some nice gauges at high altitudes in some of these mountainous areas. And this is really important because typically these rain gauges are in the lowlands and it really underrepresents rainfall. So we spent quite a bit of time, we used a rainfall surface and we developed a lapse rate. We also checked all of the data for any anomalies and patched it. And so we brought in this highly distributed rainfall layer. Of course, it's just a rainfall surface. It's a model based on elevation, but it's the best that we have until we manage to get better measurements spatially of rainfall. And what this meant was that instead of having, a maximum rainfall of around 1,000 millimeters per annum or 1,500, up in the highest peaks, it was estimating rainfall to be closer to 3,000 millimeters per annum. And this was quite important. And this is something that perhaps isn't always considered or parameterized in models, especially in these very mountainous areas. So rainfall itself can often be underestimated. Please go on to the next one. Jason?
Yeah, it's not changed on your side.
Not for me. There you go. You can just put everything on that slide. Might be easier. So the next thing that we had to look at was evapotranspiration. And again, this is incredibly important for when you're looking at scenarios of land cover change. And so we also spent quite a bit of time exploring data sets to bring in. We're quite fortunate that we've got reference evapotranspiration from nearby weather stations, the ones in blue. And we wanted to see, could we use some of the remote sensing products available globally, global products. And what we found was that almost all of them are estimating reference ET. So you can see that here, and we realized that we couldn't use that. It was going to hugely affect our land cover scenarios, which was the main purpose here. So instead, we fitted we had to extend the ARC data because it didn't cover our full period. And so we produced a model based on the ARC data to use. But I think that now my research has been exploring how to use remote sensing products and validating it with flux tower stations locally. So hopefully we can improve on this in future. Next slide, please. In terms of a conceptual model, we recognize geology to be very important. And this is the geology map of the area. It is characterized by these fractured quartzite formations. So you can see that in the blue, the peninsula formation. And I'm going to show just a conceptual model from one catchment now, just to give you a bit of an idea of what's going on. So Jason, you can go on to the next slide, please. But it's a bit of a lag for me. So on the right-hand side, if Jason just puts everything up except the last picture, the catchment little diagram on the right-hand side shows what we're looking at. So there's a cross-section there indicated by a line, and then an arrow showing that we're looking up slope, up that particular tributary, the Assegaibos Kloof. Yeah, you can take off that diagram from Lasha for now, thanks. And this is how we conceptualized the models, and this was based on quite a bit of calibration. We used a hybrid approach of both manual calibration, but also using AutoCal for the saturated zone. And in the end, this is what we came up with that made the most sense and produced the best results. So having a very thin talus aquifer perched on top of the peninsula aquifer, each with different characteristics. And we got a lot of the information to inform the calibration from the literature. So that's both the thickness of this peninsula aquifer that varies, but also, as we know from resistivity studies, the quartzite is actually pretty impermeable, except where it's fractured along tributaries and other areas. And so the key thing that we just found with this was that we found that some unexpected results from looking at this conceptual model, and the very real need to do a lot more studies to understand these systems better. You can go on to the next one. Just the next, this is just one of the resistivity studies from the area showing the high conductivity along fractures and otherwise low in other areas. So then the next slide is about the soil data that we collected. We went and collected new data in the field. We collected bulk density, depth, particle size, and we also did experiments to establish water retention and saturated hydraulic conductivity for different terrain units. So we had 5 broad classes shown there on the right-hand side in the colors, the cliffs, upper slopes, lower slopes, valley, as well as the peaks. And then we measured we tried to get samples for each of these within the main land types from the ARC, which you can see are the thin black lines numbered over there. So that was something quite novel about the study. You can go on to the next slide. And then this is the land cover information we put in. So we realized at the time that there was no information on where these alien trees were, and yet we were supposed to be modeling their impacts based on where they are and if we cleared them. And so I still don't see this. Oh, there you go. And so we then ended up doing this ourselves using satellite imagery. We produced a map for that point in time. So if you could just go on to the next slide, please, Jason. We also took stream flow cross sections, many of them throughout all the catchments, and we input this into the model. And this was quite important for the mic hydro parameterization. And then in the end, we had 5 different land cover scenarios that we looked at. And this is on the next slide. And I'm just going to have to speed over this because of the time lost now. But the first scenario that you can see shown there, each of the rows is a different catchment, and each of the scenarios is a different column. The first scenario is one where if we had cleared all the alien trees, it's completely restored. You can see the key on the right-hand side. The second column, scenario 2, is the current scenario as it was in 2019. So where you see the bright red splotches, that is where the aliens are. Scenario 3 was a hypothetical scenario where everything was invaded except the riparian zones. Scenario 4 is the reverse. So only the riparian zones invaded. And then the last one is everything invaded. And if you can just go on to the next slide.
I'll give you 5 minutes extra, so don't panic about your time. Okay. All right. Sorry. Oops, wrong way. Okay. Yeah.
No, a great job. It's lots of pushing. So the next slide is the validation results. So on the left-hand side, showing the mean daily simulated results in red compared to the observed results in black for 3 catchments, because 3 of our catchments had really good gauges. We realized retrospectively that the 1 catchment we couldn't use the gauge for because of interbasin transfers, very sadly. But so these are our 3 validation results. And then on the right-hand side, the same time series, but logged. So having a bit more look at those low flows. And then the next slide shows the statistics for this. And you can see that for each of the 3 catchments that we were able to validate, the correlation coefficient is around 60%, and this is at a daily time step. The percentage bias is really pretty good, slightly negative for most catchments. So slightly underestimating stream flow, whereas for the Elands River catchment, slightly overestimating. And then the Nash-Sutcliffe efficiencies of the high 50s. Sorry, Jason, if you just click next, it'll highlight those ones that I was talking to. So I think the key thing here is that there's a slight underestimation of peak flows and a slight overestimation of base flows overall. So yeah, let's get into some results. This slide is now showing, if you can just put everything up there, Jason. I suspect there's a bit of a lag, so I'll just keep talking and hope you can all see something. But if you put them up, the scenarios will appear up at the top. And what it's basically showing is the percentage change in stream flow on the y-axis here for our restoration scenarios. So the first one is if you were to clear the current level of invasions back then in 2019. So it's basically subtracting scenario 2 from scenario 1. So if you took the stream flow estimates under the alien trees where they are now and compared it to a hypothetical scenario where they were all gone. Okay, so this is the realistic scenario, the first one. The second one is then doing the same thing, but as if all of the areas were invaded except the riparian zones, and then you cleared it, this is how much change in stream flow you'd get. For the fourth scenario, it's the same thing except only riparian zones. So if all the riparian zones were invaded and you cleared those riparian zones, how much more stream flow would you get? And then for the last one, just everything being invaded and if we cleared it. So just a number of things to point out here. If realistically speaking, we cleared what was there at this point in time, the colors, by the way, of the dots refer to the different catchments on the right-hand side. So you can see which ones are always producing the biggest change in mean stream flow. So for example, the Du Toits really comes out at the top. And then quite often the Upper Berg is coming down the lowest percentage change in stream flow. And that's what's giving this variation. So, so you can see for the realistic scenario that the percentage in mean stream flow is around 0.4% to about 8.8%. And so that's decent, and you can quantify that. And you can also put a RAND value on that in terms of if you put it into a yield model. But I think that the message here, even more importantly, is that if you allow the invasions to proceed unchecked and you do not clear them, you can end up with a situation much more towards the right-hand side of this graph where the stream flow losses can be closer to 20%. And this becomes quite significant. And then, of course, conversely, if you clear them, there would be much more gains. And so the message here is not to let things get to that point. Next slide, please. What this slide is just showing, if you just put everything up, essentially, is that the impacts on stream flow are proportionally greater in the mid to low flows compared to the high flows. And this is really, really important because what it means is that the impact that the aliens are having, you're not going to feel in the time when you've got lots of water in the middle of the winter, but you're going to be feeling this in the dry season. so your mid to low flows. The next slide shows something similar, except we're looking at the wet versus dry years. So again, if you just put everything up, it's going to put colors on the background there just to sort of roughly represent the wet compared to the dry years. So the wet being the blue, just very roughly, at around 2,000 millimeters per annum being the cutoff. And you can see that for all the catchment, there's a negative relationship between the percentage difference in stream flow of all scenarios relative to the baseline, as well as total annual rainfall. So, and this is the most marked for two of the catchments, the Du Toits and the Elands. And what this basically means is that this impact of the reduction in stream flow is exacerbated in dry years relative to wet. So for example, if it's a really wet year, you're not going to really feel the impact of the alien trees, but in a really dry year, you're really going to feel that impact. And of course, the converse is true for clearing as well, that the benefits will really be felt in the dry season. Yeah, so the next slide, this is just looking at the seasonal trends. And again, it's a very similar message that in summer and autumn, stream flow reductions for restoration or for alien tree invasion are more pronounced. So again, if you're clearing, you're going to be feeling the benefits in stream flow enhancement in the summer and autumn when you need the water the most. And the next slide, heading towards wrapping up, is just plotting these results onto the stream flow reduction models and graphs that were produced by this original Scott and Smith ones, but then Moncrief adding the uncertainty intervals. And you can see that they fall for pine very much where they would be expected in terms of flow reductions. So they along that suboptimal growing condition curve, which would be expected. They're not grown in their plantations. Conditions are probably suboptimal, but it just shows that these modeling results are at least concurring with some other studies, some quite well-respected studies. And then just the next slide is exploring, those two scenarios, the terrestrial compared to riparian invasions. And just relatively speaking, because the first graph I showed was very skewed by, of course, the coverage, the area of the invasions. But this graph shows, if you account for area, that riparian invasions have almost 2 times greater impact compared to terrestrial invasions in terms of stream flow impacts. And the next slide is just an interesting one, decomposing into the water balance results to see what is really driving these changes according to Mike Shee. And you can again just pop everything up, Jason. But the key, in fact, you've got to just flip through because there's, if you just go back and forward a bit, then people can see. But the big changes are transpiration and base flow. So in other words, alien trees, when they invade, decrease stream flow by increasing transpiration and decreasing base flow. And then you can, if you go on to the next, if you click next, there'll be another graph that comes up. And this is from work that I was doing with Julia, where we've looked at even more detail, like what about transpiration does Mike, like what process is Mike suggesting is changing? And you can see there that some of the big impacts are like really evapotranspiration from the soil with a bit lesser impact from groundwater and canopy evaporation. So yeah, this is very interesting. And I think that the key thing is that these things really need to be validated to check when we're running these scenarios, are the processes producing the results that we see, are they actually substantiated? Can we validate them? Okay, so just to conclude, in terms of the implications of our finding, it shows that restoration is very important in terms of water security because it helps to build resilience in the system. So we saw that when water is most needed in the dry seasons and very dry years, that is when we see the benefits. And at the time, these results were very novel because it was able to capture this spatial uncertainty and provide detailed results at a very, very fine scale. And hopefully this gave funders more confidence. And then in terms of recommendations, we really do need to keep pressing towards more fine resolution field data. If we're looking at land cover scenarios, you really need good evapotranspiration data. to validate with and also inputs. And then we need to be leveraging remote sensing data where we can. And this is a study that I mentioned earlier that we're busy doing right now. Hopefully it'll be published soon, where then we can get much better estimates for evapotranspiration all across the country, even where we don't have flux towers. And then one thing that we kind of noticed was that all modeling tools, not just MikeShe, really struggle with the Cape Mountain areas, these complex anisotrophic fractured quartzites of the Peninsula Aquifer, as well as our really complex rainfall patterns, highly spatially variable. So it's just, it's something to think about that we really struggled to set up well in this surface modeling tool. And then, yeah, just in conclusion, the next slide. So, I mean, these findings are very important to leverage investment, and if we want to really upscale restoration to scales that really matter. And there's just a newspaper article from the time about how many cities are really struggling with these invasive alien plants impacting their water resources. So with that, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Alana. Yeah, it was a really insightful presentation, and really fantastic to see such a good application of the model, particularly in somewhere where, well, as you've seen, day zero, where influencing these aliens and invasive removals can actually improve things considerably related to areas in the Western Cape water supply system. So fantastic to see a practical example of that, and some great research that you've done there. Are there any questions for Alana? So Eureka, you have a question. Is the GeoMonteef app of value to determine water savings through the IAP clearing as a quick indication instead of modeling? Do you have any comments on that?
Can I take? Yeah. So I think, yes, that app it's super useful. And for sure, for me, it's inspired a lot of the work that I've done. I don't know if anyone has the link. They can share it in the chat right now. But so that other people can know about it. So it's basically just, for everyone's benefit, taking the stream flow reduction curves plus the uncertainty estimates that he's modeled. And then you can plug in the taxa of concern, its density, and your coordinates, and you can get out a water impact value. So I think for sure it is. There are some limitations. The one is that it's only for the Western Cape. And so that's a big limitation. Like if you're in another part of the country, it's not going to help you. And so that's why we're working on trying to do something a little bit different. We're using, I've shared the link in the chat if anyone's interested, but we're using remote sensing products of evapotranspiration, which we've validated across the country using flux tower data. And then we're able to then use that to do a kind of similar calculator. And we're busy with projects now to try and develop that further. So yeah, hopefully there'll be lots of tools.
Fantastic, thanks. That was a great answer. Are there any other questions from the floor? Right, if you've got any further questions, did the study look at how the proposed increase in runoff when removing the aliens would affect floodplains? That's from Gavin Martin.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Gavin. Would affect floodplains. So actually, each of these subcatchments that we looked at were, if you could see from the maps, quite high up in the overall catchment. And we did that on purpose because we were trying to isolate the impacts of these alien trees. And as you go down more into the lowlands, you start to get just increased complexities in terms of like water being moved around, different land cover types and irrigation, and then very poor gauging. And so as a result, there are some limitations. And so our study did not look at the floodplains, but I think that would be really, really nice. And it could be a really nice follow-on study. These models have now been set up and could be extended if anyone was interested to do that. So yeah, looking at flood impact would be huge and very relevant for the Cape.
Yeah, Gavin, just to also add to what Alana has said, we've had a couple of studies. Sylvia, who was working for me at one stage, did some work in the Okavango, which I think Philip presented, and that was actually having a look at flood extent into the Okavango Basin, into the sort of delta regions and floodplains there. And then we've also done some work where we've actually had flood sort of intercepted water actually disappearing down swallows, which are sort of sinkholes in the river, and reviewed that, and then having a look at how some of the flooding sort of effects can actually influence your sort of riparian areas where you get increased infiltration during high flow periods, which can improve the situation. I think Julia also kind of covered that a little bit with her stuff related to wetland restoration. So it is something that we could have a look at, but yes, it would be good to have a look at it in this scenario. All right, and then Julia, you've written something here. Something I meant to note in presenting the Crom Catchment work. Alana did substantial work on the Crom Catchment on the IAP coverage, POMIG coverage, ET, peat, and water quality impacts. Apologies, misnoting the references in my presentation. Okay, thanks, Julia. All right, I think we're at time. We've gone slightly over. I'd like to thank all of the presenters. You've all done a fantastic job. Philip in particular, keeping to your time and giving everybody a little bit of extra, which is fantastic. And then certainly Julia and Alana, those presentations were really good and really interesting, with some fantastic local examples of the application of Makshi. So thank you very much to you all. And lots of people have been asking, associated with sharing the presentations, etc. We'll confirm with the presenters, but I'm sure that we'll be able to share those with you in PDF format. But thank you very much, everybody, for attending. I hope you found it useful. And yeah, we look forward to you attending some other seminars that we have. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Jason, also for hosting and organizing the whole event and all the contributions. Thanks a lot. Highly appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. Yeah, thank you very much for your presentations. Great.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
One final thing for those leaving, you can send through emails to Cornelia, and we'll, if you've got further questions. Thank you.